Well, looks like 10:07, and I will call our meeting to order. And we'll start with the minutes of the last meeting, Jim.
Okay, hello everyone.
Hi, Jim.
Jack Baker called the Goingsnake District Heritage Association meeting to order at 10:04 a.m. with 19 members and guests present virtually. 25 people have viewed the YouTube video. Secretary Jim Terry read the minutes of the November 21st meeting, and they were approved as read. Financial report prepared by Treasurer Ruth Faulkner was read by David Hampton. Total monies as of December 19th, 2020 is $11,757. The report was approved as given. Maryville Chase gave her Cherokee moment reading articles from the Cherokee Advocate around Christmas time in 1894 and 1895. Jack Baker announced that the Cherokee Heritage Center has volume 10 of the Moravian records for sale now. Luke Williams mentioned that Donna Clark has volume 10 available for sale online at the Talbot Library and Museum website. Luke also mentioned our new GDHA website, Goingsnake.org, was made available with grant money from the Oklahoma Historical Society and described website features and capabilities. He told us our dues can be paid on the new website now, and we can view recordings of our monthly meetings on YouTube by searching Goingsnake District. Jim Terry gave a presentation about the Leavenworth prison records he found in the National Archives at Kansas City for Looney R. Gord, son of Jack R. Gord and Nellie Kingfisher. Jack Baker gave a presentation reading from the Moravian diaries about events around Christmas time 200 years ago. He began his presentation showing his Moravian Star Christmas decoration and ended by telling us about the Moravian Christmas exhibit in Tahlequah at the Cherokee National History Museum this year. Jack adjourned the meeting at 11:25 a.m.
Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? If not, I would entertain a motion for their approval.
I so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved. So, okay, next we'll have Mary Bell's Cherokee Moments.
Thank you, Jack. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
This is a repeat Cherokee moment that I gave quite a few years ago. And occasionally I'm going to be bringing some of the old ones back because I know some of the new members were not present when I gave the particular ones. And this Cherokee moment is from the headquarters records of Fort Gibson, Indian Territory, 1830 to 1857. And the following is from National Archives, Microfilm Publications, M1466, roll number 4. Letters received January the 3rd, 1846 to June the 13th, 1857. And there are 5 rolls of this microfilm, and these 5 rolls contain both letters sent and letters received. And this particular roll of microfilm contains chiefly of correspondence relating to the affairs of the Cherokee Nation with some correspondence of John Ross. And the first letter that I'm going to read was sent from headquarters, Fort Smith, January the 12th, 1846. Sir, reports have reached the General that a large armed force of the dominant party in the Cherokee Nation is collecting some 30 or 40 miles north of Fort Gibson on the briny, with what object is not known, against Stan Wadey and his party. I am directed to order you immediately to take means to find out what ground there may be for such reports, by sending out an officer for that purpose if necessary. The general does not think the Cherokee authorities have anything to fear from the refugees or those under Stan Wadey, unless the latter are attacked. Besides, the troops on the line have been ordered to interpose to prevent violence, come from what quarter it may. The chief men of the treaty party, who have recently returned from Texas, have expressed to the general the most anxious desire and hope that their friends would commit no act of aggression upon the dominant party, and did not doubt that they would continue quest and wait the action of the government. You will please furnish Colonel McKissick, Cherokee agent, with a copy of the letter for his information. I have the honor to be, sir, your obedient servant, James H. Prentice, Assistant Adjutant General. And this letter was sent to Lieutenant Colonel R.B. Mason, 1st Dragoons, Commander of Fort Gibson. And the next communication is Cherokee Agency, Cherokee Nation, 16th of January, 1846. Sir, complaint has been made to me by Mrs. Ellen Cootie, a widow woman of the Cherokee Nation, setting forth and stating that a portion of the Osage Indians were now and for some time past been in the habit of stealing, carrying away, killing, and eating her hogs near the Big Island on the Verdigris River within the limits of the Cherokee Nation. Mrs. Cootie has requested me to make application to the military department for a command to be sent out to where those depredations are being committed, sufficient to drive those Osages out of the vicinity or conduct them into their own nation, at all event to prevent them from committing any more depredations. Yours respectfully, your obedient servant, James McKissick, Cherokee Agent West. General, and this was sent to General Arbuckle, United States Army, Fort Smith. P.S. Mrs. Cootie refers to the following persons living near the Big Island on Verdigris who can give satisfactory information in regard to the Osages committing depredations on her property, to wit, Charles Cootie, James Callan, George Drumgoole, Alexander Drumgoole, Archibald Cootie, and James Drumgoole. And the main function, incidentally, of the Fort Gibson fort was to keep peace among the different Indian tribes, which I'm sure was a chore. The next communication is Cherokee Agency, 23rd of January, 1846. Sir, some days ago I wrote to General Arbuckle informing him that complaint had been made to me by Mrs. Cootie that the Osages were committing depredations on her stock at or near the Big Island on Verdigris, and requesting in a very pressing manner that a military command should be sent out to put a stop in some way to the further commission of these depredations. On last evening, I received a letter from the general informing me that he had instructed Captain Boone to order a company of dragoons whom whom of his judgment, I think that transcription was kind of faded and I couldn't make it out, and could at this time be spared from the line to Fort Gibson to receive instructions from Colonel Mason for the removal of the Osages who are committing depredations in the neighborhood of the Big Island of Verdigris. I'm requested, however, by General Arbuckle, in the event of my receiving information that those depredations have ceased and there should appear no urgent necessity to send out the command, and I apprise you of this fact. I have seen Mr. Looney Riley this morning, who I understand is the brother of Mrs. Cootie, and made particular inquiry of him as to the state of affairs in regard to this matter. He represents to me that those aggressions are still kept up by the Osages, that quarrels frequently arise between them and the Cherokees in that neighborhood on account of those depredations, and that the Osages sometimes threaten the lives of the Cherokees because the Cherokees, object to the Osages taking and killing the cattle and hogs. Mr. Riley seems to think there is great necessity for this command to be sent out. I learned by Mr. Riley that a council held by the treaty party and old settlers on last Monday, the following persons were appointed delegates to go on to the city of Washington in addition to those already there. Treaty party: Daniel McCoy, John A. Bell, Stan Wadey, Ezekiel Starr, Dr. Thompson, Bryce Martin. Old settlers: William Holt, John Duncan. With great respect, your obedient servant, James McKissick, Cherokee agent. And this was sent to Colonel Mason. The next one, which will be the last one, Cherokee Agency, March the 23rd, 1846. Sir, the Cherokee citizens of Saline and Tahlequah districts have forwarded to me a document containing 21 signatures in which they allege as a grievance and imposition upon them that the Seminoles, without authority and contrary to their wish, are moving to and forming a settlement on the Wild Rye Bottom on Grand River. They further represent that the Seminoles have become very troublesome, that they are in the habit of killing their stock and converting it to their own use, as I understand, for subsistence. For the reasons above stated, they, the Cherokees, have made application to me as their agent to have those Seminoles, thus intruding, removed without the limits of the nation. Assuming these statements to be correct from the number of endorsements, I consider it to be a duty as agent to ask of you, as the commanding officer of Fort Gibson, to send out such a command as may be necessary to remove those intruders. I am with great respect, sir, your obedient servant, James McKissick, U.S. Cherokee Agent West. And this was sent to Captain Cady, U.S. Army, Fort Gibson. P.S. I have that it might not be amiss to put down a list of those who have signed the document alluded to wit: David Rowe, John Alberti, David Tadpole, Joseph Tadpole, Hog Shooter, Ambrose Downing, Shadrach Carey, James Downing, William Alberti, Jackany Baldridge, Isham Snow, Joseph Van, Samuel Downing, David Downing, Tuckwa, Lewis Downing, Thomas Pigg, Colcutt Waskey, Peter Dennis, Chiwatuki, and Joseph Clinian. And that concludes my Cherokee Moments for this morning. And incidentally, this particular set of records is very, very interesting. Very interesting.
I have a question. Where was the Great Island on the vertebrates?
You know, that's something I don't know. I was curious about that too.
Remember there being an island in the vertebrates at all. Jack? Where's Jack?
Jack may know. Where is he?
Wait, muted.
He's on mute.
Yeah. No, I don't. I'm thinking it's probably close to the Three Forks area, but I don't know either. We'll need to research that and find out.
And this was, and of course, this was in 1846.
Right.
I wonder if a map of somewhere would show that.
It may. And we have a good map of that area early, of the Three Forks area. I'll check that and see. So it's also interesting about the Seminoles because I knew that when they were removed, a group of them settled near Fort Gibson, but I realized they were there as late as 46. And also on the letter of the people requesting they be removed, we had Tuckwa there as one of the
Yes.
who's the whale, who's one of the three that swam across the river at Horseshoe Bend in 1814 to get the canoes. Then he was also, I believe, one of the assassinators of Elias Boudinot, and also I think he led the group that killed James Starr.
Mm.
Then there's a great bandolier bag that Gilcrease purchased a few years ago.
Yes, we were fortunate to see that bag. It was really interesting.
Yeah. So he's an interesting character, and his name keeps popping up more and more. He was
Yeah.
more influential than any of us thought. Well, do we have any? Yes, sure.
Fort Gibson is going to be having a map exhibit soon. I can't tell you exactly the dates, but Greg McKee is in charge of it, and he has gotten permission from the Cherokee Nation. There's a great big map sitting up at the Saline Courthouse, and he's gotten permission from the Cherokee Nation to not reproduce it, but, you know, to use it, use a photograph of it. If you've been to the Saline Courthouse, as you go up the stairs at the top, there's a wonderful map of the Cherokee Nation. It's an early one.
Okay, good. I don't remember that, but I'm sure I must have seen it. Okay, good. Do we have any old business? Or any new business? David, you know of any new business?
Am I supposed to? Because if I was supposed to, I forgot.
No, I just, what do you usually have items to?
No, I didn't have anything right now.
Okay, good.
You probably do
Well,
want
then, Luke.
that dues are now payable for the year 2021, and we've already had, I think, 44 people renew their dues for this year on our website. So that's great. So we're doing pretty good on that.
I'll do mine this morning.
Okay. Yeah, there may be another one of us or two that hasn't sent in their dues either. So, okay. Well, David, would you like to introduce our speaker today?
And so this is Andy Squires. She's Nancy wanted to send it through the walkers, and she's volunteered to give us a program about the walkers today.
So I do thank David for encouraging me to speak up. And at the time, he also acknowledged that it may be a little intimidating for someone like me to be in a group like this. That is an understatement. basically what I want to share with you today is a little bit about my background to tell you how I got to this place. Share the pioneer paper that I found that shows my relationship to John Walker Jr. John Walker Jr., also known as Chief Jack. I nicknamed him as JWJ because there's so many John Walkers. And then we'll get to the article about the existence of the portrait of John Walker Jr. And then we'll maybe talk about some next steps. But a disclaimer, first of all, I just started my research in 2016. I grew up with absolutely no knowledge of any Cherokee history at all. And I learn more and more each day how important Cherokee history is in this researching genealogy. So any and all errors or omissions are of my doing, and I very gratefully and enthusiastically accept any and all corrections, suggestions, things like that. So this is my dad here on the left, and on the right is my dad with my grandpa Jimmy. My dad was born in Barnsdall in Cherokee Nation in 1941. When he was 2, my grandpa joined the Army and came to California for basic training. My grandma did not want to be in Oklahoma by herself, so she followed him. They settled in Southern California, where I was born in 1967. My parents have lived in their house for 51 years. I moved 2 doors down from them 21 years ago. My maternal grandparents were across the street. So people around here call us the village. We've had our own village here in Garden Grove for many years. Unfortunately, I didn't get to spend a lot of time with my paternal grandparents. So this is my grandma and grandpa on the left, shortly before they moved back to Barnsdall. I'm the cute little one sitting on her lap, sitting on my grandpa's lap. And on the right is my grandpa Jimmy's resting place at the Walker Cemetery, just outside of Welch in Craig County. And it's also just down the road from where my grandpa Jimmy was born, in the Walker family farmhouse. And I'll show you that in a second. My very first memory of any Cherokee connection was sitting on my grandpa's lap, and he called me Grandpa's Little Indian. Now, I didn't really think too much about that until recently. My dad shared with me that his dad called him your dad's little Indian. So it's definitely something that I remembered. My second memory was when I was in grade school. They handed out a form, and of course I checked the box for Native American because after all, I was Grandpa's Little Indian. Because I had checked that box, someone called our house asking my parents if I needed any assistance since I was Native American. My parents sat me down and said, "Don't do that again." My grandpa died in 1986, and unfortunately, I didn't get to spend a whole lot of time with him. Fast forward to June of 2016, my daughters were becoming more independent at 13 and 17. I had a little more free time on my hands. So I decided to see if there was any truth to the Grandpa's Little Indian. I thought, I'll spend a couple months, I'll put together Dad's family tree, and then I'll be on to another hobby. I had no idea where to start. When I asked my dad, he had a few names. He'd been to the Walker Cemetery. He'd been to the farmhouse. He knew there was an uncle who lived in Miami. Well, let me tell you that it's not Miami, Florida. It's Miami, Oklahoma. I know I'm not saying that right. So my dad had some stories, but he wasn't altogether correct necessarily. So I decided that a good place to start would be, let's take the parents and the daughters and fly to Oklahoma for 4 days. Nothing went as planned. My plan for going to the Heritage Center was a bust because for some reason someone cut some underground electrical wire and it was closed. So we sort of like meandered around, some of the Cherokee Nation tourist sites. And then we did go to the Walker Cemetery and the farmhouse. And I will tell you, this is where everything really changed for me. I think I realized this was not going to be a few month little project. Prior to this trip, any research that I had done was very flat. I didn't have any pictures of any of my ancestors. I didn't have any stories. I just had a few dates, some names, and a few documents. I knew that my ancestors had come to Oklahoma on the Trail of Tears, but to see 3 graves there all lined up with that Trail of Tears plaque was quite overwhelming, and still is when I have a chance to go there. The 3 marked graves are of George Washington Walker. He is the one that built the farmhouse right up the road. He's my 3rd great-grandfather. His sister and his mother. And on the right-hand side, they're the 3 tallest ones in the back. So at that cemetery on my first visit, there were so many names. I didn't know who they were. I didn't know where to start. I pretty much just started taking pictures of every grave that had a Walker name or a Squires name. And at this point, I assumed that there was some cousin of mine that I hadn't met who had all this information on our family line, who had done all this research, and I would sort of stumble across them if I started looking for our ancestors. Note, I haven't found that cousin yet. Don't know if they're out there, but obviously I'm still looking. And this right here, the picture on the left, I show this because it's my dad standing at the grave of his dad, looking down at him. And the cemetery for me is just sort of a magical place. I was standing at the other end of the cemetery, and I was looking at my dad, looking at his dad, and I thought, you know, am I really going to do this? This seems like a big task, and I really don't know what I'm doing or where to start. But that first trip in 2016, it really changed me. I felt very drawn to these people that I never even knew existed. I wanted to learn about them. Most of all, I wanted to make sure other people knew about them, and I didn't want them to be forgotten. So what now? I was back in California with pictures and documents all over my living room floor. My daughters would say, here, Mom, eat this. You haven't eaten in 6 hours. You're staring at all these papers. It was everywhere. I was stepping over papers and pictures. I spent about 16 months trying to figure out how to trace my ancestral line. I made up this little bookmark there on the left that anyone I meet back in Cherokee Nation, or anyone that might have some information, I give it to them with my information on the back, because you never know where little bits of information are going to come from. And I stumbled across a Facebook page run by Kurt West and an amazing group of volunteer researchers. When I thought that I had all my John Walkers in a row, I posted my information to the site to see if they could verify. And I was so proud of myself for tracing all the way back to Major John Walker. Apparently I had missed a few generations. They told me that I was a Nancy Ward descendant. And I said, Nancy Ward who? Who is Nancy Ward? I didn't have the nerve to say who is Nancy Ward because she seemed like a really big deal. So I ended up Googling her, and I said, oh my, oh my. Then they also directed me to David Hampton, and I said, David Hampton who? But he sent me over pages and pages of what I'm calling sheer magic. My printer is spitting out these pages, and it's basically everything I had been looking for and more. And since then, I have met some really amazing cousins who've been very, very kind to me and to help teach me and guide me. And Rita is in this picture here. On the Nancy Ward bus trip, she says, "Oh, come stay with me. You know, we'll do the Cherokee holiday. We'll have some fun." I tell you, we've had major adventures, and those are stories for another day. But now that I had the names, I went about trying to find all of their stories. And one suggestion that was made to me is to find the Pioneer Papers. Now, the Pioneer Papers is an oral history collection that includes interviews that were conducted during the 1930s. I was very, very excited to find an interview conducted with my second great uncle, Henry. I've included a link above if you want to find the papers for yourself. That'll be, I believe it's going to be on, this will be on YouTube, so you can go and look that up if you want to look up the papers. I saw it, I read it, but I was very shocked to find that Henry got it wrong. Henry got it wrong. He named Timothy Miggs Walker and Elizabeth Neely Adair Walker as grandparents. This didn't fit into what I had already learned. This bit of information kept me awake many, many nights because I said, Henry has it wrong. How do I tell Henry you have it wrong and correct these Pioneer Papers? Well, I learned that not everything that you read is fact, correct, but it was what Henry thought of at that time as his grandparents. So, it kind of taught me that I needed to expand my family tree rather than just keep going straight up in the tree. I needed to fill it out a little bit. So who are Timothy and Elizabeth? The actual relationship to Timothy and Elizabeth, they would actually be second cousins to Henry, not grandparents. So follow me here. We've got Major John Walker. Major John Walker had two sons by two different mothers. My ancestor, Thigh Carter Walker, is half brother to John Walker Jr., also known as Chief Jack. So Thigh's son, George, and John Walker Jr.'s son, Timothy, are cousins. Henry, being George's son, would be second cousin to Timothy and Elizabeth. So if that little map there has your head spinning a bit, we'll take a bit of a little commercial break here. You remember the farmhouse and the cemetery that I showed you before? That was built by George Washington Walker here, my third great grandfather, in 1866. And because I just can't help myself, I'm going to give you just a super quick blurb on George Washington Walker. He turned 10 during the removal. In the Civil War, he and his family were burned out of their Tutopa home. Their wife and children were taken to Fort Scott. He fought with Stanwady. He built the farmhouse in 1866. That is still standing today. He had 4 wives. I've had one husband, and that was enough for me. 4 wives. And he had 13 children over 29 years. But that's a story, obviously, for another day. So let's get back to Timothy and Elizabeth and how they connect to the portrait of John Walker Jr. From 2018 to 2019, I made multiple trips to Cherokee Nation. And while there, we searched for Timothy and Elizabeth. My cousin Rita and we found the cemetery where they're buried by knocking on some doors, chasing down some residents. It's a long and very fun story, but what we found was that as of 2015, this house, everything in the house, the land, including the family cemetery, was now owned by non-Cherokees, Don and Carla Perry. We will learn how that happened in just a bit. But the Perrys claimed that there was, quote, lots of stuff in the big house. And after that first visit to the cemetery, they allowed us to visit the cemetery. I had one call that I had placed to Carla returned. Since then, I haven't had any response from the family. I've sent them some letters, some articles, a few phone calls, but nothing has been, they haven't responded as of now. On the left, here's a picture of Elizabeth and Timothy and the house where this portrait of John Walker Jr. may have hung. The picture on the right is the steps to that house as they looked in 2018. Okay. So here is the long-awaited article. Last summer, August of 2020, while just randomly searching for the name Walker on newspapers.com, I found this article. I will read it to you. It was an article published July 5th, 1920, and it was entitled, "He Was a Great Cherokee." Now it says Mrs. C.M. Walker, but that's a typo. It's Mrs. T.M. Walker of Fort Gibson, mother of R.M. and Jack Walker, has some interesting Cherokee relics, among which is a full-length oil portrait of John Walker, grandparent to the Walker boys, who was a noted Cherokee in his day, being intelligent and wealthy. He had a fine plantation in the Old Nation and owned some of the finest horses in the country. This picture was taken while he was in Washington, representing his people in 1833. Being in full Indian dress, he was tall and straight, with fine head and classic features, and a typical Indian in every respect, such as described by Cooper. His wife was Emily J. Miggs, aunt of Henry Miggs of Fort Gibson, and granddaughter of Return Jonathan Miggs of Revolutionary fame. He was killed in 1833, by the anti-treaty party shortly after his return from Washington, and never saw the new Cherokee Nation for which he signed the treaty. The man who killed him finally moved to this nation and was killed by the noted Stand Watie in revenge for the death of his friend Walker. Part of the uniform which he wore in Washington is now in possession of Mrs. Walker and are fine and curious Indian relics. The leggings are of broadcloth worked in many colors with silk and beadwork. The knee sashes are also in fine workmanship, in silk and fine beads. The blouse and moccasins are also very fine, but the large sash, about 7 feet long, which went over the shoulders, is the finest and most elaborate of all. The design is highly picturesque, inlaid with many colored beads and patterns. Most of the figures we learned are old Cherokee emblems, which have a meaning understood among the full-bloods even to this day, and regarded with a sort of reverence not understood by the white man. These relics are indeed curious and interesting to the present generation, reminding us of a once great and powerful people who occupied a good share of this vast continent, now dwindled down to a few thousand souls, encompassed by uncongenial conditions on all sides, and about to expire as a nation. Of the Indians it may be said, they died not by hunger or lingering decay, the greed of the white man has swept them away. Fort Gibson Post. Wow.
Where did you find that? Just in newspapers?
Yep. This was in the Cherokee Advocate, July 5th, 1902, entitled, "He Was a Great Cherokee." I'll get it to you again, Shirley.
Okay.
I can email it to you.
Thank you.
So these are items from 1833. They would have been 70 years old at the time of the interview in 1902. The way the interviewer describes the items leads me to believe that the interviewer saw them. full-length oil portrait. He was tall and straight. Part of the uniform he wore, leggings, knee sashes, blouse and moccasins, large sash 7 feet long, which went over his shoulders. Now, this article, I believe, was reprinted in the Cherokee Advocate, but taken from the Fort Gibson Post. I have searched for the Fort Gibson Post, and I have found the years before 1902 and after 1902, but I haven't found Fort Gibson Post from 1902. The interviewer might have been named Cooper. That's what I pulled out of there, but I'm not 100% sure. So I thought, who lived with Elizabeth in 1902, to try to find out where these articles might have gone, where the portrait might have gone. In the 1900 census, which is just 2 years before the article was written, it shows Elizabeth and her granddaughter, Emma Malloy, living in the house together, but sons Richard and Jack, their wives and kids, living nearby, possibly also on the property. And Elizabeth dies in 1908. At that time, only 3 of her 11 children are living. In her will, she gave her land and the house. Now, the house was known as the Old Judge Tim Walker Residence Home Place. So obviously it was well known. She gave the land and the house to her son, Jack. And then Jack dies just 3 years later, and the land passes to Timothy. Now, I went through Elizabeth's will, and I was super excited to find that there was a personal property page. And I thought, they're going to say this personal property, they're going to say this magnificent portrait. And I got to the personal property page, and it says, no personal property. It couldn't be that easy, could it? All right. So we've kind of gotten into the weeds a little bit with all of this, these words here. So let's just go back and wrap this up with who lived on the property. Let's see if we can track who might have inherited the house, the portrait, and things like that. So these first 2 pictures here are the steps of that original big house. Now, we were told that the big house did move, but the original big house where it stood was on this, at this site. And the one on the right, the picture on the right, the 3rd picture, is a view of the Walker family cemetery from those steps. So their cemetery was just to the side of their house. The cemetery is the resting place of Timothy, Elizabeth, and 4 of their 11 children. So Elizabeth, she is the one that I saw first when Cousin Rita is always in front of me, pulling fences open and knocking brush down. So we got into the enclosed area, and Elizabeth is the first one that I saw. I'm always struck when I find the women, because the women seem to be a little harder to find. They have fewer stories, things like that. And I'd been looking for her for so long. I walked over to her, and her grave site, it says mother. And I just stopped and I said, Elizabeth, I have been looking for you. Where have you been? Obviously, she's been there all along. I just needed to find her. She came during the removal with her parents on the Taylor detachment. Next to her is Timothy M. Walker, and his stone says born in the old Cherokee Nation. And of course, his father is John Walker Jr., famous for being murdered in 1834. The Tennessee deed books have Timothy under the guardianship of William Lowrey, and sometime between 1840 and 1841, he's listed in those deed books as having gone to Arkansas. So I'm not 100% sure, did he stay in Tennessee with his mother after John Walker Jr. passed? But obviously he and his brother make it here and settle in Fort Gibson. And then next to Timothy is Tommie. And Tommie was their youngest child. He died at 22, unmarried with no kids. I guess his claim to fame is having the biggest turnip in 1885. Kind of cute. It measured 26 inches in circumference. So maybe he was a famous turnip grower. I don't know. And then we have Timmy right next to him. And he died at 25, unmarried with no kids. Have Dedrick. Now, Dedrick did marry Delilah Johnson. He married at age 22, but he died at 36 years old with no children. His wife did remarry, but she didn't have any children of her own. She had some stepchildren, but none of her own. And then last, this is Lowrey Pack Walker. His stone is broken in half, and that's Rita's hand. She picked him up, put the stone upright so we could get a picture of it. I will tell you that all of these stones had additional writing on it that I intended to look at again on my next trip, which of course hasn't happened yet. But Lowrey Pack married Sarah Brown and had a daughter, Emma Malloy. Now, Emma was living with Elizabeth in the 1900 census. All right. So, the generations that lived on the property. The first generation, of course, is Timothy and Elizabeth. They have 11 children. The second generation, their son Jack, inherits the property from Elizabeth when she passes. Third generation, Timothy inherits the property. Timothy and Anna had 5, Jack and Susan have 4 children. Their son Timothy inherits the land and the property. And then Timothy and Anna have 5 children, one of them being John Russell Walker. Now, John Russell Walker was the last to live on the property. And when he passed away in 2015, there were no descendants of that generation. How does that happen? The children of Timothy and Anna Walker. Now, I got a lot of this information from Marcia Elliott. David got me in touch with Marcia. She's a Fort Gibson Historical Society member. Timothy and Anna discouraged their children from ever marrying. In fact, John did marry a woman who already had some children, and his parents disowned him, kicked him out of the house. But when they passed, his siblings let him back in. So this was a property that had multiple houses on the property. According to Marcia, most of the kids lived there for a lot of the time. Some of the kids were very involved in the Fort Gibson Historical Society. But when John passes away in 2015, there are a couple different stories, but what ends up happening is that the land went to the Perry family, who Rita and I met, to be more accurate, who we chased down and met. They were gracious enough, the Don Perry and his son-in-law, they let us into the cemetery. I did have a phone conversation with his wife, but again, the letters and my attempts to contact them have gone unresponded. So is the portrait and the other items still in the house? We don't know. Where could it be? Could it have gone with one of the other children in these 4 or 5 generations? Who's to know? The next steps, what's next? 109 Walker Lane is the address of the big house. It's on Walker Lane. How long will that Walker Lane sign stay there now that there's no walkers? I don't know. The Walker family cemetery was very, very overgrown. You can see it from the road by the big giant cedar trees, but it's really in a state of disrepair. And when we went there in 2019, if you were to climb over a fence and a little bit of barbed wire, you could get in there, but again, it's private property. So what is next? I don't know. I do know that Elizabeth's parents, Walter Scott Adair and Nancy Harris, they came with their parents on the Taylor detachment. Their graves are marked. Elizabeth's is not. I think at the very least, hers should be marked. I do still have a very long list of names that I need to track down, try to find to see if anybody has any more information. I have talked to Marcia a couple times about maybe who might still be in the area that might know something of this. She did say that Oklahoma Walker, who was one of John's siblings, would have known, but of course they're gone now. So that's pretty much the end of my presentation.